Go.
In 1995, a man published a book which revealed the secrets of his childhood. Dave Pelzer, who was once an it, became a man. In the continuation of this speech, I will inform you about the life of David Pelzer and what to do in the case of child abuse. I have read over and over again about David's life and would like to share part of it with you. David Pelzer was a victim. He was a victim of his own mother. His mother physically and emotionally abused David. At one point, David was her favorite. Then he became her favorite to abuse, for David had 3 other brothers, and he was the only one that was physically or emotionally abused. To David's mother, no longer was he a human being, but an it. For that is what she referred to him as, an it. He was a nobody to her. The physical abuse David went through was very severe. David would go for days without food. He would be to the point of starvation to where he would eat scrappings out of the dog bowl that the dog would refuse to eat. He would steal food from other kids' lunch boxes, and he would steal frozen food from the cafeteria and consume it. He would also eat food out of garbage cans. David went to school in clothes that to him reminded him of Swiss cheese for all the holes that were in it. His clothes were so out of shape and raunchy that the kids at school emotionally abused David. So now he was being abused at school, emotionally abused at school and at home. Other things that David was put through are his mother rubbed his face in his little brother's dirty diaper to the point where his nose began to bleed and there was feces up in his nose. There was a time when she tried to get David to lay on a burning stove, and he just watched the clock because he knew that if he could make it through till his brother arrived home from school, then he would survive for another day. She would lock David in the bathroom with mixed chemicals such as ammonia and bleach, and David would have to breathe through the vents in the bathroom to survive. She would fill the tub with freezing cold water and force David to lay in that water and was not allowed to rise up from it for even a minute, and he would have to lay in there for hours. She would make David do dishes in scalding hot water where he was not allowed to bring his hands up out of the water for even a minute. When the family would go out on outings, David was forced to sit in the backyard on rocks and sit on his hands. Then when the family would eat dinner, David was forced to sit in that same position on the top stairs of the basement. So he would have to smell the food and wasn't allowed to have any of it. David was also forced to sleep in the basement on an old army cot with no blankets. Anytime that David's mother had suspicion that David had consumed any food that day, she would make David throw up. And if there was anything in it, David would have to consume his own throw up. At school, David was checked daily by the school nurse. And David would have lies ready for each marking or bruise or welt that was on him that his mother had told him to tell the nurse. The one time that the nurse did contact David's mother about the markings on his body, David came to school, and the nurse realized that the beatings that he received were 10 times worse since she contacted her, so she stopped doing that. That is until she seen the stab wounding on David's chest. There was one night where David was doing dishes, and he wasn't doing it quickly enough for his mother, so she pulled out a knife and threatened to stab him. Although she was so intoxicated that she could not control her own body, she began rocking back and forth, and the knife flew out of her hand and stabbed David right in the chest. And she was in fear of being accused of hurting her child, so she didn't call the emergency. She didn't take him to the emergency room or take him to the doctor or anything. She just wrapped it up on her own and down to the basement to his room. The day the nurse seen that stab wounding, went and talked to the principal, and they called in a police officer. David left that day with that police officer, and from that day, David was free. He was free of his mother. Although, unfortunately, his problems did not stop there. David began going from foster home to foster home. And then, fortunately, he found a family that understood and was able to work with him on his problems. Now David is a very successful man. He has written 4 books. The first one, A Child Called It. The second, The Lost Boy. A Man Named Dave. And he has also written The Privilege of Youth and Moving Forward. Child abuse is very common, and fortunately we are more aware of it now than we were in David's time. According to the Help Guide written by Joanna Sayson, the PhD, and I quote, 906,000 children are victims of abuse and neglect every year. Abuse can be caused by a number of things. Sayson says it can be caused by the history, meaning if you were abused as a child, there's a great chance that you will be an abuser when you have children. It can also be caused by stress, lack of support, or even drugs and alcohol. Child abuse doesn't just hurt the child in that minute, it is long-lasting. Sayson says that child abuse damages a child's sense of self and the ability to have healthy relationships. The sooner child abuse is stopped, the greater their recovery is going to be. Now, there is a fine line between discipline and abuse. According to Sayson, child abuse is striking a child with a hand, fist, or foot, or with an object, burning, shaking, pushing, or throwing a child, pulling a child by the hair, pinching or biting a child, or cutting off the child's airway. If you are suspicious that a child is being abused, physical signs that you can look for are bruises, welts, cuts, or a pattern of unexplained injuries. Some behavioral signs you can look for are torn or inappropriate clothing. You can look for a child that is shy or fearful, or a child that is afraid of going home. If you suspect abuse and you wish to intervene, you need to contact the Department of Child Services or your local law enforcement. The 1-800 number you can call for Indiana is 1-800-800-5556.